The topics for the Zoom lectures were originally developed because our society, and as a physician, I was indoctrinated in pre-med, medical, and then I worked 2 years on a academic degree in cellular physiology, but it was always drug-oriented, pharmaceutical drug-oriented, which is a basic philosophy of conventional medicine, that if you've got a physical, mental, or emotional problem, we have drug for it. And you should ignore the toxicity and side effects, and especially the high cost if it's in patent. Fact is, periodically, representatives from the pharmaceutical industry are called for hearings in Washington, D.C., questioning them about the high cost of drugs, particularly in the United States when they are sold in Mexico and Canada and in Europe for a fraction of the cost in the United States. And time again, the answer is we're saving lives of mothers, fathers, innocent children. How can you put a monetary price on saving lives? I kind of skeptical when I realized through some experience that major foundations and funds for retired people are very high in drug company stocks, because the drug company stocks provide dividends because they are more profitable and perform above expectations. And when the stock market drops, they drop the least. And when it increases, they increase with the stock market, just like other things. And also they're very preferred stock because their profitability is so high despite these protestations that we're saving lives. And it's particularly sad as people get older and you find out that they don't even go to the drugstore to get prescriptions filled, because they have a choice of are they going to have a roof over their head and clothes on their back and food on the table, or are they going to buy expensive drugs? And so they choose not to even take drugs that they need. Well, in my personal experience that I did not anticipate, I found out that the programming that is in DNA, our genes, that the nutrients that are needed for human biochemistry and physiology are present in the plant kingdom, and that if you have a broad diet, you can provide these molecules that are used in cellular synthesis to make bioactive molecules that structure and functionally carry out the process of human life. So with this, I'm going to talk about a condition that is one of the most common ones worldwide that the World Health Organization calls a silent epidemic, that is probably due to worldwide increase in food supply, which has led to obesity. And with obesity, we have alterations in the metabolism that promote high glucose levels in the blood, which is toxic to the endothelial cells that line the capillaries of the critical organs in your body. With that, we'll start with the first slide. We're going to address diabetes, and there are two types. Type 1, which is primarily insulin dependent and is frequently more common in younger population, and type 2 diabetes that is more associated with resistance of the body to the effects of insulin, produced in the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. And to my personal amazement, how the active ingredient from the aloe vera leaf gel research ended up when individuals with had type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes got benefits as it brought balance into the metabolism to lower glucose levels in the blood, which were toxic to the tiny blood vessels that bring nutrients and to the and electrolytes to the cells of the organs and take away waste products. So let's go to this slide that the diabetes has been around for a long time, and actually 1550 BC, before our calendar started, there reports an Egyptian papyrus of elevated glucose levels and the problems it caused. Well, in 1921, two medical students on summer externships in departments of the medical school, Dr. eventually Banning and Best, they were students at that time, found out in ligating the pancreas of dogs that the vessels go into the pancreas, that there was elevation of blood glucose. And from this, they deduced that there was something made in the pancreas that decreased and regulated blood glucose levels. And eventually, they found out that insulin was identified in being made in the pancreas. And being students that went to medical school with the idea of helping people, they wanted to make this as a gift to all the diabetics in the world. And unfortunately, that very little dissemination of this knowledge was done. There were research articles published where particularly Leonard Thompson in 1922, the next year, a 14-year-old type 1 diabetic, they reduced his blood sugar by extracting the insulin from the pancreas. And this didn't get it to the thousands of diabetics in the world. It was just in a medical journal. Well, one of the problems was that you can you can't patent a natural product like insulin. But the drug company, Eli Lilly and Company, developed a processing factory, which actually I have visited on a post-medical school trip to companies. And they took frozen beef and pig pancreases, and they extracted the insulin out of the pancreases, and they could patent the extraction process and the details of their factory, so they got intellectual property protection. And with this, they could had an economic incentive to produce insulin, and they made it available very cheaply to the world, because Batten and Bess were not trying to get a percentage of the development. As I say, they wanted to give it to all diabetics, but it didn't get distributed until there could be an economic basis that someone could get paid for trying to distribute it through the world. So Eli and Lilly really became a well-known company as a source of low-price insulin. Now, there are estimated about 38 million diabetics in the United States, and most of these are type 2 diabetics. Finally, you'll find that probably at least 15 or 20 type 2 diabetics for every type 1 that are present, which is insulin dependent, whereas these type 2 diabetics are primarily obese patients. And being obesity is a pre-diabetic state. And obesity is a national and a worldwide plague because the availability of food, high caloric food, is so high, but not only does diabetes due to elevated blood sugar, but it increases the atherosclerosis, or deposits of lipid material and narrowing of blood vessels to the heart, which causes heart attacks. It causes narrowing of the vessels going to the brain that cause strokes. It leads to amputations of toes, feet, the lower leg, and even the upper leg due to atherosclerosis in the blood vessels to your extremities. There's increased arthritis. The body's immune system and host defenses are decreased by high blood sugars, so it increases infections. And in fact, the incidence of mutations or damage to DNA that can lead to malignancies or cancer is increased by obesity. And this is at the heart of the problem with diabetes. In fact, I was on a plane ride with sitting next to a worldwide expert in diabetes, and he was going to a conference to talk on it. And I was telling him about all the benefits that we were seeing anecdotally by adding the Aloe Acemannan to the diet of diabetics. And he sat there seemingly unimpressed with what I was telling him. And the one question he asked me was, did this decrease the degree of obesity in the patients? Because there is a strong evidence that if you can bring a person down to normal fat distribution in the body, that the diabetes will disappear. So obesity is a real problem. Now, one of the things I always want to bring out with the high glucose levels, they're damaging to the endothelial cells of the capillaries, is that you see these ads in magazines and papers that if you come in and you're a woman, you won't wear a bikini bathing suit, or you have blue tiny blood vessels that show up in your skin of your abdomen or legs. If you'd like to get rid of these for cosmetic purposes, if you come in, they'll take a very fine needle and they will search until they get it inside the blood vessel and they can pull back blood. Then they'll change the syringe to very concentrated sugar, disaccharide, table sugar, and squirt it in that blood vessel, and then use compress bandages to tighten down or collapse those dilated blue blood vessels. And the sugar causes the endothelial cells inside those capillaries to react against the sugar and slough. And actually, it scars the blood vessels together because of the damage that this high concentration of glucose causes. Well, in diabetes, your blood glucose is not just sugar syrup, but over a long period of time, it causes damage to the blood vessels. And here we have an electron micrograph to the right upper of a capillary, and the smooth muscle that is around the capillary is the red arrows that go to it. And the autonomic nervous system can contract these smooth muscles to reduce blood flow. and keep it more into the central of the body, like in cold exposure, or expand it and even facilitate perspiring to the sweat glands and radiate heat from their skin by running more blood. Now, the E is the little erythrocyte that is going through this tiny thing. And the important thing is it's malleable. And the blood vessel endothelial cells that line inside the muscle have properties that other cells don't have, and that the charge on the surface is a deterrent to blood coagulation. You don't want your capillaries to get blood clots in them. And so the endothelial cells are kind of like your skillets that you have, or pots and pans in the kitchen that things don't stick to with the Teflon coating. Well, the endothelial cells are coated to let the erythrocytes squeeze right on through to bring oxygen from the lungs. And the serum that carries the erythrocytes have nutrients in there for the cells, not only the muscle cells, but the endothelial cells and glandular cells that this capillary is providing sustenance. And the drawing down at the bottom there kind of gives you an idea of the lumen where the erythrocyte is to the right, and you have the endothelial cells that line that we're showing in the electron micrograph, and then the smooth muscle layer and the blood vessel wall. But the glucose is toxic to the endothelial cells if it's above a certain level. And it seems to vary with individuals, but there's no question that you can cause irritation or just like an ulceration of the endothelial cells that sloughs them off, and then you can compress this and they will fibrose and eliminate unsightly capillaries that you're not wanted for appearance. But this damage to these capillary cells particularly causes damage to the blood vessels in the kidney, and these vessels that we're seeing here are unusual in that they allow white cells to come up and pass into the tissues. There's very, shall we say, incredible capacities for flexibility of these cells that surround the blood vessels. And of course, the diabetes causes damage to these endothelial cells over a period of time. Now, I was talking about the spider veins that denude it. You can inject high levels of glucose, but the cells have damage that's caused to them, and that every cell has mitochondria that make they make ATP, but they can make overproduction of superoxide molecules that cause oxidation with high levels of glucose. And it damages RNA molecules that are made from DNA. And there are other vesicles in the cells that high glucose obliterates. There is a sodium glucose transport inhibitors that are affected by high glucose levels in these endothelial cells. And even though the endothelial cells metabolize glucose for their energy needs, too much glucose is bad. And there is a level of glucose that is healthy, which is a state of homeostasis, first developed by the father of human physiology named Dr. Hans Selye. And you want to keep your glucose level into this healthy zone, not too high and not too low, because too low glucose can lead to seizures and unconsciousness. But this dysfunction of the glucose in these capillaries particularly leads to retinal blindness, to the renal failure in the little capillaries in the kidney, the capillaries that go to the heart muscles and to the brain cells, resulting in heart attacks and strokes. And then we mentioned about the damage to the extremities. You can get non-healing ulcers that and osteomyelitis, because the body's host defenses are reduced by high glucose levels, and oftentimes the tissue has to be amputated. And this is one of the major causes of amputation. And it should also realize that the immune system doesn't function as well. And very commonly, if you go see a primary physician and you're having serial yeast infections, they will test you for diabetes, because the tendency to develop yeast infections is increased because host defenses, or the immune system, doesn't work as well. And diabetics have a tendency for more chronic systemic infections like kidney infections, bladder infections, gastroenteritis, all types of common infections. Now, in the United States, in the year 2021, 375,000 died of heart attacks. And the next year, 160,000, nearly 163,000 nearly died of strokes. And of course, there are diagnosed in the United States at least 29.7 million people, including 4,000 of these are adults with type 2 diabetes. And they estimate that in the United States, there are at least 7.7 million people, or 22.8% of the population, that don't know that they have diabetes and hasn't been discovered. That would be 11.7% of our population that the Center for Disease Control estimates about diabetes. So we're talking about a significant subject. So anything that causes benefits to diabetes is a very important subject. And of course, this aloe acemannan is a key ingredient in our dietary supplement, New Eden, which I have been able to develop over several decades to try to add to the dietary intake so that the genes can run the programs properly to make bioactive compounds to manage the glucose levels in the body in the zone of homeostasis where it's not toxic. Now, common symptoms of diabetes is long been known as increased thirst, or it's called medically polydipsia, and having a dry mouth. You have increased urination, and this leads to dehydration, and so you have a dry mouth, and constant thirst. A overwhelming problem with diabetes is fatigue, blurred vision, unexplained weight loss, and there's numbness or tingling of the hands and feet. You have slow healing sores, particularly of the legs, and this can be a overwhelming problem that leads to amputations of the lower extremities. And as I had mentioned before, that if you have yeast infections, one of the first things that doctors will come up with, are you diabetic? Well, let's check your blood sugar because that is a common indicator that the body's immune system or host defenses are reduced by this high glucose levels. There are different sources that recommend the levels of glucose, and we're using the American Diabetic Association standards, which vary from different groups. But the AM or morning glucose level shouldn't be above 99 milligrams per deciliter of blood, and that this after breakfast or a meal should go to approximately 140, and it shouldn't last more than 2 hours that the insulin response from the pancreas begins to take the level of glucose down. And very fortunate, it's been discovered that the stroma of the red cells are a onboard surrogate marker for what's happening to the endothelial cells in the various organs. And this binding of glucose to the hemoglobin in the red cells is called Hemoglobin A1 C test. And it gives you an average of what the blood glucose has been for the last month or so, usually up to 90 days. You don't run it more often than that, but this gives you an idea of what's happening inside the capillaries to your brain, your heart, to your eye, to your kidneys. Fortunately, you can draw this blood from a vessel, and you can get an idea of how bad your diabetes is, because if you have periods that it's high, but then it's down into the average level, this can, when it's high, it will bind more glucose to the red cell stroma. And so you can't fool Mother Nature with the hemoglobin A1Cs by the fact that sometimes you can draw the blood and it looks like a normal level. But if you're having any episodes of high glucose, it will increase the binding of glucose to the stroma. And that the average glucose rate that they try to have diabetics to have is no less than 70 milligrams per deciliter of blood and no more than 180 milligrams. And of course, this shouldn't be for a prolonged period. And that the diabetics, they try to have that the hemoglobin A1C is approximately 7 or close to that, whereas non-diabetics, that the hemoglobin A1C runs more like 90 to 130, and the hemoglobin A1C seldom is over 5.7. So that 7% for diabetics is a target to try to manage their poor metabolism of glucose, to bring it down to where you have less accelerated damage to the organs, whereas the actual non-diabetic 5.7% binding of your normal levels of 90 to 130 is common. Now, type 2 diabetics oftentimes present insulin, but it doesn't work. And you'll find anywhere from 10 to 20 more type 2 diabetics for every type 1, which we frequently call youth onset or insulin dependent, because the type 1 generally they are not producing insulin, whereas the type 2 they produce insulin, but it just doesn't work to take the insulin inside the cells and out of the blood. For decades, the only type of management for diabetes was to try to avoid sugar intake and limit calories and different foods that produce glucose. And it's still an important part in diabetes control. And what needs to be known is that exercise is synergetic, because when you exercise, you burn ATP, which is made from the mitochondria breaking the bonds between the glucose molecules to transfer it to ATP for muscle contraction. So you want to control the diet and have exercise, which is synergistic in terms of managing diabetes. And type 2 diabetic, you try to encourage them to get to an ideal body weight and limit calories. And calories are particularly high in carbohydrates. Then in the diet, you want to have more fruits and vegetables, nuts, berries, and a low amount of animal meat, especially processed meat, and reduce fats in the diet. But again, daily exercise is essential in the management of diabetes, along with the benefits that you get from multiple molecules added by dietary supplementation, which we found out that is used to produce in the endoplasmic reticulum the second major step in cellular synthesis to make a domain for cell-to-cell communication, which the programs in the genes is to move the body's biochemistry to the normal zone. And so this addition of the Aloe Acemannan supports this activity to try to move the cell's metabolism to balance or homeostasis, which would be lowering of your glucose into the healthy levels. And again, exercise is synergistic to this. And many can't afford pharmaceutical drugs that they bring out. There are many of them. People own these drugs, but they're relatively expensive. Whereas exercise and diet and choice of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and berries, and low caloric generating lots of potential glucose to make fat, you want to avoid. Now, I want to emphasize that there are molecular mechanisms for anti-obesity, and they're the same ones for anti-diabetic properties. And that in this paper about flavonoids, which are special kinds of molecules made in plants, that I'm going to show you the variety of the structure of these flavonoids, that it's a 15 carbon chain with 2 phenyl rings and a heterocyclic cycle. And there are over 5,000 types of flavones in plants. Well, this is just an example that in the plant kingdom, you have a wide variety of molecular structures that the programming in the DNA of your genes, which is the program of life, that call for, and that's why for centuries, grandmothers and mothers have had that saying that if you want to be healthy, eat different colors of fruits and vegetables, because the different colors indicate that the plants have different molecular structures. And this is an example that I want to give you. This structure inside the box is the parent structure for flavones, but you have flavonols, flavones, and isoflavones, and you can see the variation of the different structures. And the important thing is that the genes in the programs use all these different types of molecules that are in the plant kingdom to hook together to make bioactive molecules to optimize the metabolism, not only of diabetes, but the metabolism of the human body. And I have this slide here just for flavones that you could take other structures like carotenoids. There are many different permutations of the molecular structure of carotenoids, but all of these are utilized by the program in the genes to hook them together to normalize not only blood glucose, but normalize all the substances, even the electrolytes, the potassium levels, the magnesium levels, the calcium levels, and the phosphorus levels of the body. And this is an example of how nature has in the plant kingdom all these different types of molecules that are utilized by the cells of the organs to, because each organ has made up of cells, then all the organs require, say, fluid and nutrition, but then they have there is a group of profile of molecules just for the cells being alive and functional. But then there is the profile, a secondary profile that I want to emphasize with this variation in molecular structures, that, for example, the thyroid gland uses iodine like no other gland in the body to make thyroxine, which is used to increase the rate of metabolism in the cells. The endocrine glands and the sex glands, like the testis and the ovaries, use the structure for cholesterol, which is called cyclopentanoperhydrophenanthrene. It's the parent structure which molecules are added to make all the different hormones for the management of not only distribution of fat and to support producing eggs for the female and sperm for the male, but influence the metabolism of all the cells for the distribution, for fat distribution within the body. And this incredible variation in the molecular structures of nutrients are utilized by the genes to make bioactive compounds that run the biochemistry of life. And one of the greatest problems where we get benefits from Aloe Acemannan is in the diabetics, whether it be type 1 diabetic or type 2 diabetic, to influence improving the metabolism for the management of glucose, which we've tried to emphasize in this lecture. And with that, that's the end of what I have to offer.